There is like a tagline from a radio here in Brazil. It says in 20 minutes, everything can change. And that's the reality here. You need to be very creative, very adaptive, and to understand that nothing stays the same, never.
So Brazil is not for beginnings, for a number of reasons. Like I said, Brazil has more than 350 different types of documents. It makes differentiating between good and bad customers even more difficult.
Brazil is like, you have to already come with a really strong foundation financially or backing, community, people, in order to actually try something. Because you need to be able to fall back on something because there's going to be so many mistakes. Like you're going to make 1,000 mistakes and you need to be able to have the resources to bounce back.
Acabou em pizza. People will find a way, they'll find a middle ground, and it will end up in pizza, meaning people will be gathered around the table and finding a common solution.
So when you hear this expression, veja bem, you're going to have bad news and really bad news, or some excuse for something that went bad.
Brazil is like one of the most social countries. So it's very inviting and it can be misleading in that, okay, it must be very easy to do business, but that's not necessarily the case. So Brazil is not for beginners kind of means that, look, things are not always as they seem. The rules may not apply here.
Hello and welcome to Brazil is Not for Beginners. I'm your host, Isaac Matzner. As we come to the end of 2025, I wanted to take a step back and reflect on this last season. As longtime listeners of the podcast may know, I started this project more than 2 years ago when I was running an early-stage startup based here in Brazil. I was regularly in touch with foreign funds and investors, and in these conversations, came to realize how little English language content there was about working and doing business in Brazil. Late last year, my co-founders and I decided to wind down our startup. We actually talked about this on one of our podcasts, and I went back to a more corporate role, but based here in Brazil. I decided to keep this podcast going, looking to maybe keep a relic of my startup experience, or just to keep doing something to scratch that entrepreneurial itch. I increased the frequency of the podcasts, recorded some in-person video episodes, and covered a bunch of topics. We talked about beer, chocolate, food, fraud, agroforestry, pet care, entrepreneurship, insurance, and search funds, just to name a few. We also talked about more general topics like corporate finance and governance, building boards, raising capital, navigating bureaucracy, and overall, what it takes to build, invest, work, and more importantly, live in Brazil. I've been in this country for the better part of the last decade, and I continue to learn new things every day about living and working in this great place. I'm truly grateful to the folks that have come on this podcast to share their stories, and as we wrap up this year, I want to look back at some of my favorite stories from this season. Across the 19 episodes we recorded, our guests shared their experience in this amazing and complex country. We heard lots of unique stories and great insights, but also a number of common themes. The complexity of the market, the need for adaptability, the need to be creative, the importance of building relationships and community. All of these things ran as common threads throughout the episodes. We have more great things coming for season 4, but in this recap, I want to listen back for some extended excerpts and some of the great stories that we heard throughout the season. If you've listened to this show long enough, you know that Brazil still loves paper and forms, and this can make seemingly simple processes, well, complicated. One of the clearest patterns this season was the central role of bureaucracy and trust. Brazil's business environment is rich with opportunities, but it's layered with procedures, documentation, and informal norms that require time and humility to understand. Let's start with Thalita Lacerda, CEO of Pet Love, who gave one of the cleanest explanations of what not for beginners means in the business world.
When I hear Brazil is not for beginners, I say, yeah, you have to be cognizant of this very complex framework for doing business. It's number one. And then number two, I would think about the importance of like having local roots in terms of being able to build actual relationships, because sometimes what people say, it's not what they really mean, unless you have this strong relationship and you build this trust. I think about these two aspects of Brazil is not for beginners.
Rafa Lichtenecker from IDWall provided more context.
So Brazil is not for beginnings for a number of reasons, but since we are talking about the word of fraud, like I said, Brazil has more than 350 different types of documents. It makes differentiating between good and bad customers even more difficult. So, with the advance of generative AI, fraudsters are now able to deepfake living or dead people and even create a new person. So this is what we are having in Brazil, right? The fraud evolves so much that currently it's even challenging to defeat it. This has like a huge financial and exposure impact for companies and consumers, right? On the business side, if you are not prepared to mitigate fraud, really it can lead to the company going bankrupt. On the customer side, it can have a financial and reputational impact as well.
As Rafa points out, complexity is not merely a bureaucratic inconvenience. It drives behavior, shapes industries, and creates a need for deep local expertise. And that need for deeper investigation isn't limited to fraud prevention. It shapes how credit is evaluated, how partnerships are formed, and how investors build conviction. Rebecca Fisher from DiviBank explained just how many layers you have to peel back before you can truly understand a company.
We want to know who the founders are for these companies. So we are looking at their tax filings, for example, or employment status. And fintechs, especially, one thing we looked at a lot was even personal relationships within the company, and who the personal relationships are close to the company, because you want to understand who the founders are, who are close to these founders, if this is a fraud risk, which is a huge problem in Brazil also. So it's not that easy to run a credit analysis in Brazil. I wouldn't say that it's just a Serasa score or just an SPC score. It tends to be a lot of different factors in one big cake for you to make a decision.
Frank Wundheiler's observation about language also reflects how culture influences responsibility, trust, and accountability.
There is this difference here, create a very bad situation for you, feel very bad, and people doesn't understand. Is the veja bem. Veja bem means that there's a guy with a gun in the back of your head.
Yeah. Listen here.
Listen here. I was trying to do the thing. I said, deixa comigo, and we're going to see you soon. For some reason, everything derailed. And the tax auditor is here at the door, and he wanted to talk to you because he's going to impeach your assets or anything like that.
Yeah.
As an individual, not as a company, right? So when you hear this expression, veja bem, you're going to have bad news and really bad news, or some excuse for something that went bad.
To operate effectively here, you need to read and understand documents, but also tone, context, and intention. This awareness of Brazil's unique rhythm is crucial, especially for those looking to invest. Tim Chamberlain of Brunel Partners underscores this, highlighting the importance of embracing Brazil's way of doing business and acting decisively rather than waiting for an idealized market.
It would be easy to find reasons not to do something because there's laws or regulations you're not used to, you don't understand, they don't make sense. You just need to be able to roll with that stuff and sort of accept it because this is how they do business here. We're in their universe here, not ours. So you adapt, you understand how it works. And if you find the right niche, the market is massive. So the opportunity set right now would be fantastic for a search fund or a private equity fund, etc. But, if you can get funded, you're in a great spot because if you wait until, we've got the perfect president, everyone loves Brazil, there's going to be a wall of capital and you'll end up chasing opportunities that you probably shouldn't be chasing.
Alexandre de Ambrosio also highlights this when he talks about how the path in Brazil is not necessarily linear.
There's a myth in Brazil that you need to bend rules and break rules to be successful in your objectives. But that is a myth because you can do business successfully. You can actually build solid structures and solid companies and corporations in Brazil without bending rules or breaking the law. And that is sometimes a deterrent for foreign investors in Brazil. Now, how things work here, Brazil does not work in a linear way like things in the US mostly work. So if you don't get to point A to point B through a straight line, you need to sometimes zigzag. That doesn't mean bending rules. It means that you have to understand the context, understand what base influences decision-making in Brazil.
These stories highlight the importance of trust, context, and cultural literacy, and show that they are just as important to navigating Brazil's complexity as the procedures and contracts. A second major theme of this season was adaptability, not as an abstract virtue, but as a real survival mechanism. Few people articulated this better than Lina Kemp from Aliança Empreendedora, whose work with micro-entrepreneurs gives her a unique vantage point.
Seeing the entrepreneurs in Brazil, they have developed this ability of adaptation to many different conditions. So they migrate, they change the address, and they need to change the things they're doing depending on the trends that were set by the soap operas, So that would represent for me is to be an entrepreneur in Brazil, you need to be very creative, very adaptive, and to understand that nothing stays the same, never. There is like a tagline from a radio here in Brazil that says in 20 minutes, everything can change. And that's the reality here.
Adaptation also drives innovation. Guto Procopio from Let's Beer and his career in craft beer are a great example of reinvention over more than a decade.
I couldn't stop studying about beer. I became a brewer, a beer specialist, and also I've been to sommeliers world championships. And in Brazil, we do the best sour beers in the world, I'm truly sure. The Catarina sour, the sour made in Brazil, with lots of fruit on it as typically Brazilian styles of beer. This is a way of doing this sour with fruit, but it's different from America because the fruit is very present and very strong on the beer and also fermented within the malts of there. So it's sour, it's fruity, and it's very Brazilian. And from my experience, judging beers in international competition with American judges, they are always very interested about our sour beers. And using more of our barrels is something that we have to show the world too, because we have many different kinds of wood here in Brazil, like Jequitibá, Amburana, and many others. Its wood barrels change completely the characteristics of the beer, and you cannot copy this kind of thing, So that's something that I think Brazil can show not only for Brazilians, but also for the world.
Guto's story is one of several this season that showed how innovation in Brazil often emerges from the meeting point between global technique and local identity. Tomás Tragro captured this dynamic in a very different context by taking the idea of a high-end burger and reshaping it into something unmistakably Brazilian.
I missed the burgers here, and the whole idea was I'm going to get everything I like from a classical burger and try to Brazilianize it. But not trying to reinvent the wheel, but use Brazilian stuff. The best bread rolls for burgers for me in America, it's the potato roll. So here we did sweet potato roll. The cheese, American cheese, a cheese that melts really well. So I went after a cheese in Brazil that melts really well. We found the queijo Minas Miniatura. Pickles, a lot of people think pickles is cucumbers, but no, pickles is the process. So we do with chayote, chuchu in Brazil. Best sauce for burgers like the Shake Shack sauce. So we try to emulate a sauce like it. A Bob sauce here, but it's ketchup, mustard, mayonnaise, and pickle water. And then the blend, Brazil is the biggest producer of beef in the world, so it's all Brazilian beef.
Whether it's food, finance, or technology, so much of innovation in Brazil is less about copying a global model and more about transforming it until it fits the local reality, a theme we also heard from Eduardo Zilberberg.
In the beginning, people would be like, okay, I have this successful business in the US. I'm just going to bring it here, translate it to Portuguese, and then we're going to make millions. And I think a lot of companies learn the hard way that's not the case. It's very different in terms of timing and the cultural and local adaptations that you have to do to the business. And sometimes you have to adapt it to a point where it's not even close to what it was, for example, in the US.
Innovation here often means starting with a global framework, but re-engineering it until it becomes something local, functional, and uniquely Brazilian. It's not about copying models, it's about transforming them. As someone who moved to Brazil, I always enjoy talking to other foreigners who did the same thing. I think a lot of folks have a similar experience with the journey. It starts with surprise, then challenge, and then settling in and admiration. This season highlighted that journey with honesty and depth. We begin with Arcelia Gallardo, founder of Mission Chocolate, whose reflections combined personal adaptation with cultural insight.
Being from California, I have seen the rags to riches, right? Any immigrant can come, work hard, get a car, buy a house, send their kid to college. Brazil is not that. Yeah. Brazil is, you have to already come with a really strong foundation, right? Financially or backing community people in order to actually try something, because you need to be able to fall back on something, because there's going to be so many mistakes. You're going to make 1,000 mistakes and you need to be able to have the resources to bounce back. And so this consistently happens, which is really scary, right? Yeah. But yet people are like, well, why are you in Brazil? It's like, because I love it. I actually love working with my team, like, because I have had a business in California and here I have something to compare it to. So Brazilians really like slowing down, right?
Okay.
You could take this as a good thing or a bad thing. But I think that this is why a lot of Americans are in Brazil, because Brazilians will sit down to have coffee. They will take their break for lunch and they want everyone to take the lunch together so that we can talk. And at first it was annoying and it really like stressed me out because I was like, you need to work a lot faster, right? But they were like, oh, but we made cake. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now I'm just like, you're right. Let's sit down and have this.
We made cake. We got to eat the cake.
Yeah, and let me know how's your life going? Because at that point, the team works better, right? They're stronger. They appreciate what we're doing a little bit more. So I love working in Brazil because Brazilians really appreciate the downtime. They appreciate their vacation. They appreciate like the 15 minutes a day to have coffee. Like they will sit down and they will have it. And so they've really taught me to slow down and really appreciate just the day-to-day life of being human. And that's what I appreciate most about being in Brazil.
That honesty is what I love about this season. Our guests didn't romanticize Brazil. They showed the complexity, but also the humanity. Another example, when Tomas and Deco talked about why they live in Rio.
Rio is real, man. Rio is real. It's different.
Short, perfect, enough said. Schreiner Parker also offered great advice for anyone making the transition, especially when it comes to one of Brazil's most sacred traditions.
There are other things as well, I think, that are important when you're coming from abroad to try and pick up on, which is understanding those cultural nuances and keys and trying to participate in some way, shape, or form in those, whether that's by picking a team and then actually caring about that, looking into it, following it, enjoying it. That makes a big difference. And I tell everybody that moves to Brazil from abroad, pick a team. Doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter what your reasoning or rationale is, but do it and get into it because it's an automatic in, because it shows buy-in. And I think Brazilians really appreciate buy-in.
Phil Cowders from Courageous Land offered what I think is one of the kindest observations of Brazilian culture.
I would just say that the Brazilian temperament and mood of just generally being happy and laid back and more chill, which, by the way, cannot be mistaken with being necessarily like lazy or not hardworking. As Brazilians, I know a lot of them are extremely, extremely hardworking, dedicated, focused, all that. But I just think that in general, I just feel like the mental health in Brazil is pretty dang good. I feel like people are relatively, like good at living life and have less stress and just kind people and very friendly. And so, that's one of the things that I just most appreciated about Brazilian culture.
And then there's Alex D'Ambrosio, whose international career gave him a unique vantage point. Rather than simplifying Brazil, he described the experience of returning and realizing how much he still had to learn.
I moved back to Brazil at the invitation of one of my clients, that as Brazil was starting to do privatizations and they're doing public concessions and project finance. And I was brought to Brazil to this company to help them develop, set up an in-house project. But then I had worked my whole career until then as a lawyer in the United States, as a US lawyer. Even though I advised Brazilian clients and other foreign clients, American clients, US clients about doing business in Brazil and vice versa, I had not had the actual experience of working as a lawyer in Brazil until then. So that was an interesting change in how I learned to do business in Brazil. But there's a lot of uncertainty of things in Brazil, right? And things can change very quickly, very rapidly. And you say, I didn't see that one coming, because nobody could see that one coming. And then what you need to do is you need to think it over, readjust, maybe change some of the ways you did things and move on. You have to learn how to move on. That's why I talk about the flexibility and adaptability. Well, that's part of the game. It's part of doing business in Brazil. Change is implicit.
His honesty, like so many others this season, reminds us that Brazil isn't just complex. It's instructive. It reshapes you. As you heard throughout this season, language is a guide to Brazilian social dynamics. I always like to end my interviews by asking guests about the expressions they love, the small verbal clues that reveal how decisions are made, how conflict is approached, and how trust is built. This year, the guests delivered. We learned that
when somebody deixa comigo.
So the direct translation is leave it with me, right? So leave it with me.
Yeah. Make sure that you're not delegating anything. You are, in a sort of way, putting yourself at risk. You have to monitor the person that you're living with me.
Trust but verify. Then Aaron Stanley reminded us that clarity is not always a cultural priority.
if we're trying to ask directions on the street, she would always ask multiple times, multiple people. And I'm like, why do you have to ask this person? We just talked to this other person. And she's like, oh, I just want to make sure. And then in the US, if someone on the street comes and asks me, hey, do you know where this thing is? I don't know where it is. I'll be like, sorry, I don't know where that is. But like here, people, sometimes they'll just tell you something anyways, even if they don't know. They'll be like, oh, it's over there somewhere. It's like they're like trying to be helpful. It's like rude to say no or something.
He also learned another universal Brazilian truth.
If I slam the car door, she'd like freak out about it. Like slamming a car door is a cardinal sin.
Arcelia brought us into the intimacy of family language, something untranslatable.
My daughter said the other day was, can you give me cariño? And she said it exactly like that because there's no translation. Then the other one, it's like the colo, right? Like the mom's, what's the translation? I don't know. It's like a mom's hug, a mom's warmth.
From the startup world, Rebecca Fisher shared a battle cry you'll hear inside any Brazilian sales team.
Faca na caveira, a knife to the skull, which I guess has a little bit of like pirate imagery. It's a little bit violent, but I think it's a great Brazilian expression about just like how bloodthirsty in a way Brazilians can be for success. And when we're motivated, we will stop at nothing. I always remember this one because Jaime, my co-founder, when he learned it, he was like, is this something that you really say in a business environment? Which is especially when I guess we're speaking to salespeople or motivating the team. And it's really about like, let's get our energy together. Let's go. So that's an expression which we use a lot here, especially when we're trying to like motivate the team and have things move quickly.
And even in the world of early stage tech, language and culture shape how business gets done. When I asked Gus and Zago, the founders of Cacau, about expressions or habits that feel uniquely Brazilian, they didn't pick a saying, they picked a behavior, a kind of physical closeness that for them explains how trust is built.
I lived 1 year in the US and I had like a very difficult time trying to connect. Like people here are kind of more attached to people, and that really helps in business, in life and everything. Just like being friendly, someone's going to be friendly to you. And people are touchy. If someone is trying to come here in Brazil, not knowing that, it's going to get a little bit scary.
Brazilian likes to connect to each other. I think they like the relationship part, but also I think this is connected to the trust thing, because Brazil is big. There's 200 million people living here. You don't know each other in a good way sometimes. And for you to trust and do business, you need to understand, you need to know about the family. Maybe you need to invite someone, let's have a coffee somewhere or someday. I think the building trust is really important in more unstable countries like us.
These expressions, both linguistic and physical, reveal how Brazilians think, act, and relate. They remind us that this is a culture defined by improvisation, resilience, warmth, and a belief that things will work out. Which brings us to one of my favorite lines of the season from Eduardo Zilberberg.
Deus é brasileiro. God is Brazilian. I don't know if you've heard that one. What that means is that no matter how tough things get, we're going to be saved at some point. God is Brazilian, so he's going to be on our side, whether it be a soccer match or anything, right? It will all work out. And so that kind of tells you a lot about how Brazilians think, it's going to work out. God is Brazilian, right? So he wouldn't abandon us.
One of my favorite parts of this season was seeing what motivates people to build in Brazil, despite the complexity. Across all these conversations, the pattern became clear. Purpose is a competitive advantage here. People build because they believe that something needs to exist. They build because communities rely on them. They build because no one else will. So yes, doing business in Brazil is hard, but doing it with purpose makes it deeply rewarding. And nowhere was that clearer than in the stories our guests shared. We begin with Thalita, whose story is one of social mobility, leadership, and the long path towards meaning.
My mom started her life as a maid, my father as a carpenter, and having access to a good education is what helped change our lives. I studied business here in Brazil at this school, which is called FGV, which is a very prestigious school, helped change my life, gave me access to so many opportunities. So I've been CEO of PetLove for the past 4 years, and here I am.
Next, we turn to the early stage frontier, where founders build not because conditions are easy, but because the problem matters. Here's Gus Ruiz explaining what drives him and Zago to build Cacau.
There is maybe two things that excites me the most. I think the first one is that I am very connected to the problem that we are trying to solve. Maybe I'm 18 years selling things, so I know that if we can crack the code and help others to sell, they will be very happy with us and probably they will pay lots of money for us. So the second thing, like it's a day-by-day happiness that I understood that I'm having and fulfilling me, is to see that the team is engaged. This is something that makes you happy.
Purpose looks different in each story. From founders who build because they themselves felt the problem, to creators who turn personal perspectives into business, to investors who prize humility and intentionality. Here, Lucas Abreu from Sunday Drops and Guilherme Bonifacio from Canoa Capital sharing their perspectives on this.
We started the report direct from the people that are leaders in Latin America, asking them, hey, what is the next big thing that you are looking forward next year? AI is kind of dominating and monopolizing the discussion. But this year, I think that something that was really, really interesting was first about the creators economy. So the niche creator economy is really something that is happening. How the creators are like monetizing their lifestyle, because AI, they take the humanity out of the room, and everyone that's doing well is because they are kind of monetizing their humanity.
You need to have that kind of lucky to be in the right place with the right thesis in the right moment. You can be intentional for sure. Very good people, they have this intentionality and they build their own lucky. Being humble for me is important, because if you're not humble in that sense, you start to make bad investments and you start to think that you are better than others, and that's how you start to fail.
And in a completely different industry, Marcus Coutu reminded us that purpose often comes from choosing challenges, not avoiding them.
I was working for a long period in multinational, and I was very interested to work with the local capital markets in Brazil. So I decided to do an important movement in my career. I started as CEO of a local Brazilian group called Tempo Assist at that time, but that company was in a real trouble. The stocks was suffering a lot. The company was down 80%, just for your reference, and the investors was in the company for too long, almost 10 years. The damage at that time was very serious. So was my first experience conducting a turnaround process. So everything was a little scary, but at the same time was so excited for me. I think that I would have a chance to learn much more and to be a much better executive than I used to be till that moment. Basically, 6 years later, we sold the Tempo company for more than 1.3 billion reais.
Investors feel this same pull. Here's Lucas Lima on what he looks for in the entrepreneurs he backs.
I think the most positive signal is the crystal clear thinking about what they're doing. Someone can really explain to you what they're doing in a simple, concise way. Every time I see something, like, wow, let's dig in. And the biggest, or maybe not the biggest, but one of the yellow flags is someone who can't really tell you what they're doing or why they're doing it in a clear way. And that usually turns me off to a certain extent.
And from the perspective of social capital, Lina Kemp described something deeply Brazilian, the way entrepreneurs at the base of the pyramid share what they learn and lift each other up as they go.
But the most interesting thing about Fran, and is very, very common in most of the women entrepreneurs we support, is the time they start doing good, they share what they have learned. So what she did is she created an association of women entrepreneurs in the city, in her community, and she started to share the learnings and to share the things she'd received. And that is amazing. That's why it's so powerful to support these entrepreneurs, because they have power of sharing. The multiplier effect, it's so amazing. And they do a lot with very, very little resources.
And finally, we zoom out to the long view of Brazil's future. Here's Shriner Parker on why building here demands both patience and optimism.
Brazil is a place of eternal hope. That's always the joke, right? That it's the country of the future and always will be. But even in the 15 short years that I've been doing business there, I've seen Brazil make enormous strides. And I think if you talk to the old timers, the guys that were there during the Ditadura Militar, and I think there's an undeniable forward momentum that Brazil has. And if you're patient enough, and if you are young in limb, in judgment old, as Shakespeare said, then you have a chance and you can ride that Brazilian wave. And I think it's one that's worth riding.
Purpose, community, resilience. These stories show what it takes to build here and why so many people still choose to. Summing up, this season offered a wide-ranging, deeply human portrait of Brazil. 3 ideas stand out. First, Brazil is complex, legally, socially, and operationally. Second, adaptation is not optional, it's foundational. And third, relationships, purpose, and cultural literacy matter as much as strategy or capital. To work here is to commit to being here, to learning, to listening, to building trust, and to embracing the challenge. Everyone we interviewed this season, Brazilians and foreigners alike, learned to navigate the complexity not by avoiding it, but by embracing it. They slowed down, they invested in people, they learned the unspoken rules, they appreciated the tiny moments, and yes, they ate cake. To our guests, thank you so much for your candor and your insights. And to our listeners, thank you for your continued support. I'm Isaac, this is Brazil is Not for Beginners, and I look forward to seeing you next season. But in the meantime, more great expressions.
This one you've heard is about quebrar o galho. Yeah, it means breaking the branch, right? What that means is people sometimes expect that they'll find a way. You ask somebody to help you find a way, and that's quebrar o galho. So that's a very typical Brazilian expression.
There's a saying, you know what the difference between Brazilians and Americans? If you're at a party, the Americans, they leave without saying goodbye. But the Brazilians, they say goodbye and they don't leave.
There's two words in Portuguese that all of the other language, they don't have a word for it. So make it happen de jeitinho, and I miss you, saudade.
Saudade.
We have a word for it.
Pau que bate em Chico, bate em Francisco. It could be translated as something that is good for goose is good for gander, which means that if you have one rule for one person, it would apply for everyone.
I use a lot like bora, né? Let's go, like, in a very exciting way. People screaming, meetings, excited. I think that's very Brazilian.
People know what saideira is in your podcast?
We're going to explain it. The saideira is one for the road, which is an expression that I like, and it has a lot of force when you say saideira. It's one of those things that you can't really refuse.
That's it. I was waiting for the last moment to show you something that I know.
Thanks again for joining us. This podcast was hosted by me, Isaac Matzner. It was produced and edited by Maria Filmes. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube, as well as on our Substack page. We do love feedback, so please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email at Brazil, the number 4, beginners@gmail.com.